And I think one of the real enormous mistakes that Disney has made as the new stewards of Star Wars was killing off their canon, calling it Legends, and deciding to start over. And I just don't think any of this has gone well for them.
Yeah, that was a mistake. I could understand if they wanted to streamline it a little more because there's a lot out there. Like if they would have hired some people that knew something about the previous canon and like streamline some things, be like, okay, we're gonna make this canon. We'll leave that alone because maybe we want to tell stories during that, like new stories here. I could have understood that, but just throwing like the baby out with the bathwater, I think was a mistake and not the right way to go about it, because there's a lot of great stories there, especially because they've tried to sort of revamp some of them too. They've tried to be like, oh, we'll take some of this stuff from previous Legends and do our own spin on it, and it's just 10 times worse. Why are you even doing that?
Disney's decision to reset Star Wars canon in 2014, rebranding the expansive EU as Legends, marked a significant turning point for the franchise. This move effectively discarded decades of rich storytelling that had meticulously crafted through novels, comics, and games. The EU had extended the Star Wars narrative far beyond the original films, introducing beloved characters like Mara Jade and Grand Admiral Thrawn, and exploring complex storylines that resonated with fans. By eliminating the wealth of material, Disney not only alienated a dedicated fan base, but also removed a treasure trove of content that could have been adapted to new stories. And I do remember specifically Kathleen Kennedy saying, hey, what am I supposed to do? Kevin Feige's got all the source material. We have no source material for Star Wars. It's like, no. You decanonized all the source material and said it was irrelevant.
Yep. And you have decades of it. And now they're sort of trying to they're doing their own Heir of the Empire, and you already have a blueprint for that, but they're doing their own worse version, and they're throwing it in with the whole Mando universe, and it's I don't understand the they have no direction, so it's crazy.
I think Kathleen Kennedy thought Star Wars was only a movie franchise, and certainly Star Wars was the big movie franchise when they acquired it. The MCU has surpassed it since then. But if you look at the Star Wars fandom, there was a 15-year period where there weren't really any movies, and the fandom got bigger. Why was that? It wasn't just because the movies are great, and they are great. It was because of all that new source material in the expanded universe that people didn't just put up with. They didn't just kind of go, oh, that's kind of neat. They absolutely loved it, and they considered it real. And when you start throwing that stuff out, you do end up alienating people who thought, wow, I would love to see a Kyle Katarn on the big screen. I want to see a Mara Jade. I want to see a Darth Bane, because there's all these fully fleshed out characters that have amazing stories that were just waiting to be mined, that had been essentially vetted with the Star Wars audience and have been fully accepted.
Yeah, you know what people like. It's the same thing whenever movies will adapt comic books and then they just completely change characters or storylines. It's like, well, you know what works and what doesn't. You've already had it tested. Like, this is your audience testing. You know people like this, they don't like this, so why are you completely changing it? And that's what they've done. And they've also added confusion on what really is canon, what's not. Because, for instance, my favorite thing, Star Wars outside of the movies, is Republic Commando. It was a video game. It came out like 2005, and it's really cool. But then all the video games remain non-canon. But then in Clone Wars, which is canon, the Delta Squad, which is the clone commandos you play as in that game, show up. So then it's like, is the game canon, or are these guys completely different, or like what does that even mean? And it like confuses things, and no one really knows at Star Wars, at Lucasfilm, like what really is canon and what's not. So it just throws a wrench into things and makes things even more confusing.
And it really just kind of invalidates all the stuff they wanted to do with that sequel trilogy, because people already knew there was a direct path for the lineage of Luke and Han and Leia, and them having kids, and Mara Jade coming on board, the death of Chewbacca and all these kids coming aboard, one of them turning into like a Sith master, deaths and all these kind of things. They have been mapped out, not just for a few years, but we're talking like 40, 50, probably more like 100 years.
It would have been cool if they would have maybe done something more original with the sequel trilogy, because you already had all this stuff that people liked in Legends. If you could have kept that canon, then you could have been like, we're just not even going to touch like the Skywalker. We're going to leave that alone, go way in the future, show you way past it, because this is what already happened. But instead, they tried to tell their own story, and you see where that went.
If they had kept that expanded universe intact, not only would they had a fresh blueprint or ideas for these movies, but they would have had all the source material they ever needed for successful TV shows as well, because the EU is not the Skywalker legacy. It goes so far beyond that. It goes to different time periods, focusing on orders of Sith, focusing on X-Wing fighters, all kinds of things, different civil wars, crime stories on other planets, and involving the Hutts and stuff like that. There was literally so many different genres and ideas that they could have mined from that. And they threw it all away because I quite literally think that Kathleen Kennedy didn't realize it existed.
I don't know. She has to. There's no way she's that dumb. I think it's more of like an ego thing. I feel like that's what it is, where she just doesn't want to recognize that stuff or give it any semblance of actually mattering. Like I think that's what I think it's more of an ego thing with what she said about that. And because there's no way, right? There's no way she's that dumb to not realize that all this stuff exists. With all how involved she was and all that, she has to have known. So I think it's more of just her own ego and being like, well, we're going to create our own stuff because, this is a movie franchise. This ain't a book, a comic book, or video game franchise. This is a movie franchise. So we're going to do our own thing. We're going to create our own stuff. And it failed horribly.
But their original idea for Star Wars was to make it a girls' franchise, which never made sense, ever. There are certainly female fans of Star Wars, but it's not a girl franchise. It's a male action-based franchise.
Yes, it's weird to try to get rid of your established fan base, which is one of the biggest fan bases ever, to try to get a new one that's not really like not really asking to be placated to. There's not really this huge thing to be like, we need a big sci-fi fantasy franchise for girls. There's not a huge market for that. So for them to try to insult all the old fans and try to get these new fans, it's weird and it doesn't make any sense. You already have an established fan base that has been waiting for years for more content from you guys, for more stories to be told. And instead you just say, you guys can screw off. The Force is female. We want these people to be our fans now. And then those people don't spend money. So it doesn't work out.
And you brought up this point earlier, but we definitely need to hammer this one. The rationale behind the Canon reset was to provide creative freedom for the development of new films and media. However, this clean slate approach led to a fragmented narrative landscape. The new canon has struggled with consistency, often contradicting itself across different media. For instance, the portrayal of Kanan Jarrus' backstory in the Bad Batch series conflicted directly with his origin story in the comic series Kanan, The Last Padawan, highlighting the challenges of maintaining a cohesive narrative without the structured foundation the EU provided itself. Having two different origin stories for the same exact character in your new, Disney canon is a problem, especially for a character like Kanan Jarrus that actually has some potential, or at least had some potential until they killed him off.
Yeah, they have a huge problem with this. I know Filoni's done this several times where it'll be established somewhere else and then they just completely change it and they don't really know where the hierarchy lies of like what actually matters for the canon. And it's crazy because they have a whole team of this. You got Pablo Hidalgo and his boys that are supposed to be the ones that are making sure everything makes sense and lines up. But instead they don't. It's like, this isn't some small independent franchise. This is Star Wars. You have the money to pay these people to keep these things in line, to make things make sense. So it's insane to me that everything is so out of whack and out of order. You should be able to track this. And if they would have just followed the old canon, they could have done it easily. Or like I was saying at the beginning, I feel like if you would have had a group of people that are actually invested in this, that could have gone through and been like, okay, this is something we'll keep. This is something we'll throw away. This is like something we could adapt. Like you could do that. You could pick and choose instead of just throwing it all out. I think that's a huge mistake.
Well, they certainly could have learned from George Lucas and his version of Lucasfilm's really strong lessons there. Yes, they had the EU, and it was all approved by the Lucasfilm story group, I believe is what they were called. And you would submit it to there, and they would tell you to make changes because it didn't fall in line with their continuity or whatever. But when George Lucas was making a movie, he wasn't married to any of that stuff. If he was going to be in a movie, he could pick and choose the things that needed to be in there. But once you jumped outside of the movie universe, all of it was concrete. It was laid out, and it all made sense. It didn't contradict itself. But for some reason, I guess George Lucas didn't know what he was doing when they were managing the EU.
Yeah, and now it's Disney. It's this big company that should be able to do this, but they can't. It's got to be from the leadership, like from the top down, like Kathleen Kennedy. Well, you already see it with everything she mishandles. Like I think the biggest thing with that was Kenobi, where Kenobi was getting ready to shoot, and then she finally read the script and said, no, I don't like this, and had them rewrite it. So they delayed filming because they had to rewrite the entire thing. And I think that just trickles down where you see with whoever that Pablo Hidalgo and his whole group that's supposed to be keeping line canon. If that's how your leadership's acting, then what does it matter actually being good at your job and keeping the canon in line?
Well, and you look at Kenobi, which is a very flawed show on about 85 different levels. Just on the basic premise of the show itself, him meeting up with a very young Princess Leia and all that kind of stuff, it really is at odds with the movie canon and lore, and then him fighting Darth Vader again before their final confrontation. You think they would have remembered that?
Again, it's this disdain for the canon. They didn't care. They just did whatever they wanted. And again, that was the script that Kathleen Kennedy liked. What they did before, which sounded more interesting, and I believe was going to involve Darth Maul, sounded pretty cool, but she didn't like that, and so they rewrote it, and this was the one she liked, which was so weird that this was the one that got approved when there are so many flaws to it. But this is the one she wanted to go with. This show breaks the canon in a lot of ways, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, you go to that like John Jackson Miller Obi-Wan Kenobi book, which is not the best EU book, but which is a pretty fine book, or a Legends book, whatever you want to call it right now. It's Obi-Wan acknowledging that he's there to keep an eye on Ars and Veru, because they're raising Luke, but then he gets involved in something else and has another adventure. Like, Luke didn't need to be there. Leia doesn't need to be there. You could do a lot of stuff with Obi-Wan trying to maintain his secrecy and his cover as he's protecting this young boy, but it's always going back to like nostalgia berries and stuff like that. I think that's why we got Grogu.
Definitely, they're big on the nostalgia, and they learned the wrong lessons from the prequels, because ever since Disney came in, it's been all original trilogy. Everything's original trilogy. They're like, this is what people want. That's why people didn't like the prequels, because it wasn't enough like the original trilogy, and that wasn't the problem with those movies. And it holds you into this one era, and especially when they just keep desecrating it, it's really annoying. It's like there's this big universe and things you can explore instead of getting stuck in the original trilogy and then not even knowing what you necessarily want to do there. But yeah, there's so many stories you could have told with Kenobi. I remember there's like a one-shot book that was really cool where Darth Maul showed up to the Lars farm, and he's got the cybernetic legs and everything. He's there, and Obi-Wan and him have a battle. And then Uncle Owen ends up shooting Darth Maul and killing him, and it's so cool. And it was like a really cool one-shot, but that was too concise and it made sense and it worked in the canon, but we don't get anything near as cool as that.
And then every time they try to start playing with the EU and bringing in ideas, that always backfires. While Disney has occasionally dipped back into the EU, the way certain characters have been reintroduced, particularly under Dave Filoni's stewardship, has done more harm than good. Grand Admiral Thrawn, once one of the most feared and brilliant tacticians in Star Wars lore, has been softened considerably in his appearances on Rebels and Ahsoka. Rather than the cold, calculating villain introduced in Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire trilogy, Filoni's Thrawn often comes across as indecisive or ineffectual, frustrating longtime fans who expected a faithful portrayal of one of Star Wars' greatest villains. Filoni's approach has leaned more into servicing newer Disney-era characters like Ezra and Sabine, often sidelining EU legends in the process. And that is another really annoying thing, because you wanted to see Thrawn, you wanted to see some of these EU characters, and they decide to go cherry pick and grab a few, but then they're never the main event. They're just there to make his own Dave Filoni created characters that kind of suck the most important thing ever.
Yeah, that's a big Filoni problem. Every single time he's attached to a project, he brings back one of his original creations and throws them in there, and it's really annoying. And with Thrawn, I remember with every episode of Rebels, he would the rebels would end up winning whatever the situation was, and they'd get away.
It was always his plan.
Exactly. Thrawn would always be like, this is a part of my plan. I intended to get my ass beat and have them get away. And it's like, what? How is this a part of your plan? It doesn't make any sense. That's also a big problem with Rebels is they're supposed to be the small rebellion. They won every single time. It's like, you're not supposed to be constantly winning. This is before Luke, you're supposed to be getting your ass kicked. But yeah, Filoni has a huge problem with that, and I know a lot of people love Filoni. I don't, and I'm not a big fan of him potentially taking over whenever Kathleen Kennedy moves on.
The good thing about that is Filoni's portrayal of Thrawn is pretty accurate. If you go and watch Ahsoka, loses every time, but it was always part of his plan.
I watched some of the clips with Anakin in that show, and that was it. I could not think of a show made less for me than Ahsoka. It's like, I'm not going to watch that show. Yeah, I was like, I'll see what Anakin do, and I wanted to see how Hayden Christensen was, and I thought he was really good, but not a big fan of Ahsoka.
But all these years, so many people have wanted to see Mara Jade. She works for the Empire, was kind of a strange kind of, they screwed over, ends up siding with with Luke. They end up getting married to have kids and stuff like that. I don't want to see Mara Jade ever now that Disney owns it, because I know they'll just destroy the character and probably make her Zendaya.
Yeah, I don't want to see Mara Jade. There's a lot of characters I want to see. There's also characters that have been introduced in Disney Canon that I don't want to see. Like Cal Kestis is in the Star Wars games and Respawn's developer. Those writers have done a really good job 2 games in with his characters. But there's also rumors that he'll show up in a Disney Plus show, or they might throw him in a movie. And I'm like, please don't. I don't want anyone outside of like the Respawn writers room to touch him, because he's a great character and they've done a lot of cool stuff with him. But I'm so scared to death of anyone else in like that Disney Plus world touches him, because it's like we're talking about a few minutes ago with Kathleen Kennedy, where it seems like she's not too aware of the stuff outside the movies. Feels like she's not really too aware of whatever's going on with Cal Kestis in the games. But if you bring him to Disney Plus, she'd get her mitts on him, and who knows what would happen. It's like I don't trust these people.
Like, I can't think of a better piece of source material for a Disney Plus show. You get 3 seasons out of it than the Bane trilogy. Really cool stuff. I don't think it would work as a movie because people probably don't want to be rooting for the Sith. You know, and this is about the reestablishment of the Sith Order, the rule of 2, and all that kind of stuff. But it's really cool. It's a different point of view that we've never really seen. I guess we got it a little bit in the Acolyte, if you want to consider it that. And that would have been something that would have been very, very exciting. At this point, I'm more afraid than anything that they'll ever touch, you know, the Darth Bane trilogy and do anything with that character, because he was essentially done perfectly in the first 3 books.
Yeah, there's no reason to touch him. The Acolyte I didn't even watch that, but I just read up on some of the stuff that happened. Having Plagueis show up at the end as like some cameo, and then Yoda and everything they did with that. And then the fact that now they've wiped it from the face of the earth like the show didn't exist. They got rid of all the merch, and now they're just like, yeah, after they canceled it, the Acolyte's not anything. But yeah, hopefully they don't touch any of these things. Now, at the beginning, when Disney first acquired, it's like, ooh, I wonder if they'll adapt any of these stories like this, or this. There's so many things they could do. But now it's to the point where I hope they don't touch anything, because it'll just be a bastardization of what we've already seen and where it's already been executed well.
Perhaps the most telling failure of Disney's Star Wars era is how little respect Lucasfilm seems to have for expanded lore at all. Even the canon they've built from scratch. When Disney scrapped the EU, the promise was a tighter, more cohesive universe with everything counts. But in practice, even Disney's own continuity is routinely contradicted across films, shows, comics, and novels. Characters vanish without explanations, timelines don't align, major plot points get retconned from one project to the next. Lucasfilm Story Group was once touted as a safeguard to prevent these inconsistencies, yet they become little more than the window dressing. This disregard signals a deeper problem. The current leadership doesn't appear invested in building a rich, interconnected universe. And if they can't care about their canon, if they can't care about keeping things connected and making sense, then why should you care? Why should I care? Why should anybody invest in it?
They didn't care about Luke Skywalker. So you think they're going to care about Thrawn or anything else? Like, if they don't care about Luke Skywalker, the most important character in Star Wars, obviously they're not going to care about anything else. And now they're at the point where they're just completely lost. They don't even know what to do. They're just making random Disney Plus shows. Ever since the Solo debacle, they've just been lost on what to do with movies, which again was all Kathleen Kennedy's fault, because she fired the directors who have made movies that a lot of fans have liked, with the Spider-Verse movies and the Lego movie and all that. And that caused Solo to double its budget and not make any money, and then be like, oh, the lesson from this is that no one wants Star Wars movies. So everything is now a Disney Plus show that should have been a movie, but instead it's just a like 4-hour movie just put into like 30-minute episodes to make a show.
They got me on Luke Skywalker. I watched the first season of The Mandalorian. I thought it played out as a really cool video game. You beat the boss, you get a Beskar upgrade, all that kind of stuff. I wasn't interested really in season 2. I didn't hate it, but I wasn't all that interested. Once I find out Luke Skywalker shows up at the end to save Grogu and leave with him, I went and actually watched the show just to get to that moment. And even that they fucking undid.
Yeah, the first 2 seasons of Mando are fine. For Disney Star Wars standards, it's good, but season 3 is terrible. But also a big problem I have with the show, and another big problem with Disney in general, is they won't let you root for a character that isn't 100% good. Mando, when he's introduced, the original concept sounded like he's going to be a bounty hunter that doesn't really have like a moral compass. It's just, wherever the credits are, I'll do what I need to do. Instead, from the get-go. He's got a heart of gold. He's actually a good guy, and that's every character in Disney Star Wars that they have you root for. Every single one. There's no like gray characters except for the Tony Gilroy stuff, where you got with Andor, where it's like, oh, Andor's actually conflicted and he does some things that aren't necessarily like super good, but he's doing it for the greater good. And you have several characters like that where it's like, oh, these are more like morally gray characters, and I like that. But everything else that Tony Gilroy's not attached to, it's like, oh, everyone has to be a good guy. They can't have any complexity to them at all. Otherwise, audiences won't root for them. It's like, that's not how that works at all. Remember when we were introduced to Han? Han wasn't exactly a great guy. Orlando, like there are complexities you can have with these characters, but Disney doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, they needed to go back and read The Legacy of the Force, which I think is like 9 novels. And there's lots of Mandalorian lore in there. And sure, they're worth rooting for, but they will screw you over in a heartbeat. They might even send you the weapons and armor to go kill your own child if they think you should do that.
Yeah, and that stuff's interesting. That stuff makes you think compared to just, oh, this
that code of honor that's completely alien to us makes it interesting.
Yeah. Instead, no, Mando's actually just a great guy. He's just always does the right thing, and he's, even though he's this bounty hunter, and he hasn't bounty hunted since like season 1, episode 1, though. So that was another thing that pissed me off about that. When they announced like it's going to be like a Western in space, he's going to be hunting bounties. Like, oh, cool. After like the first episode, he doesn't hunt another bounty again. Oh, okay. That's
no.
There goes that.
Well, at least it's not as bad as the Boba Fett stuff that they did.
Oh, Book of Boba Fett's the worst. Oh my goodness, taking the Sand People and making them like righteous natives. What? They killed and like they did a lot of things to Shmi that I don't want you to get demonetized, so I won't say, but like it's a lot of things that happened there where it's like they're not exactly good people. Shmi was just picking mushrooms at the moisture farm and she got, yeah, Tusken Raiders aren't good people.
Yeah, I do think that the disregarding of the canon and never taking it seriously has been ultimately the original sin of Star Wars at Disney. Once they decided not to respect the legacy and the lore and the history, they were never going to get anything right.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it gives you the sense that no one cares. No one there cares. And it's crazy because it's Star Wars. It's one of the biggest franchises ever, but no one gives a shit about any of this. And it's like, why should the fans, if none of the people working on it, care?